This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest.
Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
A save by Fry! The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rangers through the middle to crown it for Seattle! And now they truly can start the celebrations. It's the Sounders MLS Cup.
Nico Lodero leaves absolutely no doubt! The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
It's gone! They've scored! Finally!
This feels fucking awesome.
This is a tiny dog.
We want to win. It's Seattle Sounders, bro.
Porter says cheated.
What was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder Hart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Open Cup seriously.
Welcome to another episode of Nos Arietes, sponsored by Full Pull Wines and our subscribers. We're recording on Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. I'm your host, Jeremiah Shan. Joining me today are my co-host, Aaron Campo, and our engineer, Lickett. As we enter the final game of the regular season, the Sounders are sitting on 56 points, riding a 6-game unbeaten streak, and have not allowed a goal in their past 3. They also entered the game against the Timbers with a chance to reclaim the Cascadia Cup with a win. And rather than go into a long thing here, Aaron, I'm just going to ask you a simple question. We don't know where this is going. The Sounders could bow out in the first round of the playoffs. They could win MLS Cup. But where we sit here right now, the end of the regular season, has this been a successful regular season in your mind?
I think that if you're of the, if you don't win a trophy, it's not a success ilk. And obviously they have to win MLS Cup for that to happen. And so you'd have to say not yet. I'm not that way, though. I think that it's really difficult to win a trophy. And if you're judging whether or not a season was a success on that criteria, you're going to be really disappointed most of the time. So for me, I have to say, yeah. I mean, I think that my criteria really, especially now that the Sounders have won trophies, it was different in 2015, right? Mm-hmm. When, the Sounders hadn't won an MLS Cup, hadn't won an Open Cup in a little bit. Well, I guess they won it in 2014, but you know what I mean, right? Not having that big trophy. Now it's just, did I have fun? And after the first 6 games, no, I was not having fun at all. But since then, the Sounders have been one of the best teams in MLS. They, I think especially, have been really, really fun to watch over the last, really, I think coming out of Leagues Cup, they've been, I think, a different kind of animal to watch. I've been having a blast for, I would say, most of the year now at this point. And that, to me, that's a success. I mean, ultimately, the Sounders are an entertainment product. They're something I like follow, watch, talk about for fun. And I think at this point, the amount of fun I've had has outweighed the amount of frustration or anger I've had. There was a lot of it front loaded in the season, and it took a while to shake that feeling. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a success, and I'm also just really excited because whereas earlier in the year it felt like, man, this is going to need to be totally blown up and rebuilt and redone and restructured. Now it's like, this team's already pretty good, and they have all these resources becoming available. And it seems like we're getting pretty solid commitments that they're planning on using them. So it's really exciting right now, which is, all you can ask for.
I definitely can appreciate where you're coming from. And I maybe I'll offer a little bit of a counterweight to that. I do feel like this game on Saturday is going to go a long way to determining how successful of a regular season it is. Yeah. And by that, I mean, if they win, that ends a almost unfathomable streak of going winless at home against the Portland Timbers. They have not won a home game against the Portland Timbers in the regular season since 2017. They haven't. So I think that they got to end that. Like, it's hard for me to imagine a world where they don't end that streak and this feels like a successful season.
Yeah.
But so they'll end that. They would win the Cascadia Cup. They'd get to 59 points, which to me is that's a big number. We'll get into this later, but at 56 points, they've already, that's pretty good. Like they're already, I think, tied for 5th best all time in terms of the Sounders' most points in a season. It's been a very good season this year, but I think there's still some elements of what constitutes a successful season. And I think what constitutes a successful season has to include winning some of those big games. And so far they have not won a lot of they've lost famously to LAFC 3 times or 4 times actually, but 3 times, their last 3 times have been especially painful. They lost their most recent game against the Timbers. And those still, I think, carry an outsized weight in terms of the way this season has felt. And it has been I agree with you. It's been a much more fun season this year, I think, than last year, for instance. It's been like the high, they've had long stretches of really, really not just successful results, but enjoyable games. Like this last week where they won all 3 of those games, even though they won 2 of them 1-0, they were fun games. They were creating chances. They were the better team end to end. But yeah, I mean, I still think for this to feel like a successful regular season, they really do need to win this season finale. Yeah,
it's difficult to argue with any of that. I'm sure, I think it's one of those hindsight versus in the moment things where if they beat the Timbers on Saturday, I'm going to be on cloud 9. I'm going to be ecstatic, and it's going to be clearly have been a great regular season. I think in hindsight, a year from now, even if they don't beat the Timbers, I think it's,
yeah, I can see that.
But I think that's, I mean, who cares about a year from now, right? We'll be right. A year from now, it'll be towards the end of another season, which hopefully they've won a supporter shield or something. So, yeah, it's, I really can't argue with any of that.
Well, one of the interesting debates that started to come up, and I don't know, I suspect you and I agree on this one, but along those same lines, it was suggested by someone in the comments that as long as the Sounders play well, in fact, they're more concerned about them playing well than they are about them getting a result in this game. And to me, I am the total opposite. If they play well and get a tie, let's just say they play really well, ends in a 1-1 tie, where maybe even the Sounders score an equalize, like they're chasing the game at the end, it's not going to feel like a successful. It's not. I would much rather them win an ugly and go into the playoffs that way than play really well and not get the win.
Absolutely. They can play like dog shit if they win that game. I don't care.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of evidence that this team is good. I don't need the confidence boost. I need
exactly
the Sounders to beat Portland at home.
And so I think that's sort of a good jumping off point into this, which is, you can go back. The thing that's been most common way of looking at this is you go back to June 15th. That was the first game after the Sporting Kansas City loss, which also technically started the second half of the season. And over the second half of the season, the Sounders have gone 12-2-2 in MLS play. And that is currently, if they win this game against the Timbers, they'll get to 41 points in the second half of the season. I am pretty sure, I have not been able to totally confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that would be the second most points in any half season in MLS history. The one team that was better was the 2018 Sounders, who went 14-2-1. So they would fall just short of that record. I believe, though, they would only be the second team in MLS history to claim more than 40 points in a half season. And I bring all that up because they've been playing well during that. It's not just the results. They have averaged almost 2 goals a game during that time. They've given up less than a goal per game in that time. They have played mostly, if not outright exciting soccer, I think perfectly acceptable offensive soccer in that time.
Yeah.
But you can go even farther back. Aaron, you were digging up some numbers. I was kind of surprised at some of what you found.
Yeah, so since the winless start, so starting with the Montreal game, the Sounders have 54 points from 28 games. That's a pace of, I believe, about 66 points over a full season. It's a 1.93 points per game. So that would make
the best
Shield,
ever season.
Yeah, Shield contenders almost any season. If you change things up a little bit and you go a little farther forward, because they still had some struggles after that Montreal game, and you start with the Philly game, so the last 24 games, the Sounders have 50 points from 24, which is 2.08 points per game. That is the same pace, not the same pace that Inter Miami has, sorry, but it would be a 71 point pace for a full season, which would be record setting in most years, right? Inter Miami obviously is going to rewrite some record books this year.
Potentially. They do need to win their season finale to set the record.
But clear, far and away the Sounders' best season, that kind of pace over a full season. And obviously you can't erase those first 6 games. You can't erase the bad start. But I think if you're looking for reasons to be excited about this team and the possibilities in the playoffs, it's a lot more reasonable to compare them to the team they've been over the last 24 games or 28 games. We're talking 3/4 of the season, thereabouts. And it's hard for me to believe that that's not a more accurate representation of this team than the first 6 games or the first 12 games or whatever it was before they really figured things out. And then if you just go back to even more recent times, they've been, I think, even better and given people more reason, given me at least, more reason for confidence in their ability to make some noise in the playoffs. So even when things were still pretty mediocre and the feeling was more or less, the Sounders are going to make the playoffs, but so what? I was actually bullish about their ability to go on a run just because of the way the team is structured. Now, man, I mean, there's not I think I've said a million times, there's not a team in the West that I don't think the Sounders can beat except for LAFC. And LAFC, I don't literally think the Sounders can't beat them. And I am increasingly kind of feeling like, you know what, they got to beat them sometime. Might as well be in the playoffs. So it's just crazy to think back even a couple months to what we really thought the potential of this team was. And I just, I've said it so many times, but I think it's such a credit to Brian Schmetzer's ability as a coach to take this collection of players, completely restructure the way the team works, and turn them into a totally different animal than what they were earlier in the season or even last season, and put them on a run like this. And it's like the second or third time he's done this in his Sounders career. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it is pretty incredible. And I think it's probably the best coaching job he's done since he's been here. I just recently filled out my end of season award ballot. I don't have him, I have to admit, as my coach of the year. I went back and forth on that quite a bit. I do think Tata Martino probably needs to be coach of the year. I know on some level it's like, oh, he had Messi. What's the big deal? But Messi missed half the season. He has them playing at a really high level regardless. I mean, you can point at the talent, but there was so much potential for distraction. But this is not a Tata Martino show. This is a Brian Schmetzer show. Brian Schmetzer has done an amazing job. And I think in any other year, he probably would deserve to be coach of the year. And I think there's a pretty valid argument for making that he belongs there this year. But not the least of which is you look at the team right now, and basically these pieces were all effectively here all season, and he sort of had to reshape them and remold them and get everyone into the position. And I guess you can argue it was his decisions that put players in different positions earlier in the year. But I think he deserves a lot of credit for rejiggering this lineup in a way that makes as much sense it is right now. You know, you have a starting 11, almost all of whom, if not literally all of whom, are probably back next year, or at least they're all have. Albert Rusnak's going to be out of contract, but I think everyone else is under contract now for next season. And they could theoretically bring that whole group back. They may choose to change things up, but this is probably the first time in a long time where I'm looking at their starting lineup going, you know, if this is who they start the season with, I'm not saying that's preferred, but I could handle it.
Yeah, I think that if that's the case, it's a situation where it's less about how I feel about that group of players and more about the optics of going into the season without making another big move, you know?
Yeah.
Which is a different conversation than we were having a couple months ago. I think and expect that they're going to make a pretty significant move in the offseason, at least one.
Yeah,
but
I do too.
I take your point, right? Of like this team, this collection of players, assuming Albert Rusnak is back, has played at an extremely high level. To some degree, they've overperformed maybe their underlying numbers, but I don't know. I think the last time I looked at their
not crazy.
Yeah, like their expected wins and expected points, they were right there. I think they're just a very good team that is maybe a little unconventional in the way that they're good, but I don't see anything about it that's unsustainable.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, they are overperforming their XG by about 0.2 goals per game, and they're giving up about a similar number of fewer number of goals than their XG suggests. But their XG, point being that their XG numbers are also pretty solid during right. this run. And the big revelation is Paul Rothrock, obviously, and I think you can maybe argue that the book is still out if he is sort of catching a hot streak and is just sort of in the form of his life, or if this is sort of the player that he is. I think there's a valid argument to be made for either. And right now I'm more inclined to think that this is sort of the player he is, because he's just so good at putting himself in dangerous positions and putting his teammates in dangerous positions as well. And it feels very repeat. Like I look at especially the last two games that he had against the Whitecaps and the Rapids, and I just see a lot of really repeatable actions.
Yeah, he's not scoring fluky goals. He's not just getting really lucky. He's not finding himself in totally advantageous positions where the setup is easy. Like he's making things happen. And so much of it is positioning and making good runs and being able to read the defense and stuff like that, which is just not the kind of thing that tends to lead to a fluky performance. Right. Obviously, the league is going to have the opportunity to adjust to him a little bit. And that can always, be a factor. I think that is he going to put up, like, is this just who he is as a guy? And these are the numbers he's going to put up year after year? Probably not, but he could have better years than this too, right? Like it's tough to say. I think that the Sounders are in a great position where they can just kind of go find the best available guy and figure it out, and that's a really good spot to be in. And if they decided that they want to, invest in the midfield, maybe, and see how Paul does in the first half of the season and keep the idea of signing a DP winger in their back pocket, for the summer window, that's, I think, a much more defensible decision than it would have been a couple of months ago, especially because I think a defensive midfield type is going to be able to integrate a little more quickly. And they're probably more important to the overall structure and function of your team. So you want them here as soon as possible. Whereas a winger, especially if Rothrock is playing at an okay, but not good enough that we don't feel like we need to sign a DP winger level, that gives them some time to integrate as well and a little less pressure. So it's really changed the equation quite a bit.
Yeah,
no question about it.
I think it definitely gives them the flexibility to go out and try to sign a player that has some upside that you're not necessarily needing to show up on the first week and be a starter.
Yeah.
And that's, they still have Pedro de la Vega, who's still sitting there as he has been starting games. He's been healthy. I think each game he shows a little bit more of his potential. It's been a slower progression than I think any of us really thought, but you can still see it there. And I would imagine an off season and a whole preseason where he's able to be fully integrated would do him well. So I'm still reasonably bullish on Pedro de la Vega.
Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart Podcast Network, which now includes Nos Arietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. We've been independent since August of 2023, but need your support to make sure it continues. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible by your continued support. Memberships start as low as $25 a year, which not only helps make podcasts like this one happen, but also gets you access to everything we produce. If you're able to support us at higher levels, starting at $75 a year, you gain access to a host of other perks, most notably entry into our members-only Discord, where the smartest, funniest, and most engaged commenters share their thoughts and ideas. To find out more, just visit sounderatheart.com and click the subscribe button in the top right corner. Thanks for listening.
And I don't know. I mean, they might go out and they might try to sign a DP forward, but I did think that's what's so exciting about this offseason is that they have options. They shouldn't feel like they have to go out and do anything. Although adding talent would be kind of the key at this point. So looking ahead a little bit to the actual game, I don't want to overlook the Timbers at all. This is a team that up until recently was really quite good. They are currently on a 4-game winless run. They've only lost one of those 4 games, but their last win was a 4-2 win over the Galaxy. Pretty resounding win. During this 4-game winless run, they've got a 3-3 tie with RSL, and then they've only given up 1 goal they haven't given up more than 1 goal in any of their last 3 games. So this is a team that, results wise has not necessarily been great, but they are still playing pretty well. They score goals in absolute bunches. They seem to have sort of figured out something defensively that, is starting to work for them. I believe they're going to be missing Kamal Miller, which is a blow at center back. He obviously was a big reason the Sounders didn't get anything out of the last game against the Timbers. But this is a dangerous team that they're playing. I don't think the Sounders should overlook them at all.
No, and I can't imagine a reality in which they would.
No,
I think on paper this is a horrible matchup for the Timbers. I think the Sounders the Sounders have been able to shut down their offense in a way that nobody else really has. Portland is god awful on the road. They have 14 points from 16 games on the road this year. They do score a lot, but like I said, the Sounders have found a way to keep them off the board more or less. I think they've given up one goal in their 2 games this year, right?
They gave up they gave up 1 goal in each of the 2 games. So
okay,
2
but
goals.
Still,
total.
I mean that's much better than most teams do against the Timbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that the way, especially the Sounders play now, is less advantageous for the Timbers than the way that they have been playing in the last few years. They're going to press a little bit more. They're going to try to compete in the midfield a little bit more. And I think that's going to, especially with missing their, I think, linchpin, as much as you can call anyone the linchpin of the Timbers defense, but missing that player and having to face a little more pressure than usual, that, maybe would be advantageous. But, from a vibes perspective, right? That's the world we're living in 2024, I guess, that's the thing that matters. The Timbers have a huge advantage in that regard. They have just, Obed Vargas was, I think, 12 years old the last time the Sounders beat the Timbers in Seattle. The pandemic hadn't happened.
A different world. It was really a different world. The last time the Sounders beat Portland, it was a different world. It was like, I want to say May 22nd of 2017, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
The Sounders had not won Champions League yet.
Yeah, and technically
only had won one MLS Cup.
Technically, the Sounders did beat them in the playoffs in 2018, but they didn't because the Timbers won the series, right? So that doesn't really count. So yeah, it's been so long, and it feels crazy how long it's been. I think the first episode we recorded in this house, which me in this house, you're in a different house, but was over 3 years ago, and I remember distinctly talking about how that there's no way that the Timbers can keep beating the Sounders at home. It's just it can't keep happening, and it felt like almost like comical at that point. It's not as funny anymore.
It is not. It is not funny anymore. It's funny in a morbid sort of way, and it should be said the Sounders have not been. There was a stretch there where it felt like they just could not. They like lost their minds against the Timbers every time. I think the Sounders have now tied the Timbers 3 straight times at home. The most excruciating, of course, which was the last game where they were up 2-0 at halftime. They seem to be flying, and then Leo Chu gets sent off, and they end up giving up 2 goals and almost have to hold on for a 2-2 tie. But we don't need to relive that. I will say that this is a team on paper that the Sounders match up very well with. This is a kind of team that has struggled, that the Sounders have handled well at home. They are not a team that's just going to sit back and absorb pressure. They want to get out and play. And the Sounders have done really well against teams that want to play. I mean, that's really been that's what's defined their success this year, is teams that aren't just wanting to sit back and counter have had trouble with the Sounders. And I don't think that Phil Neville is the kind, I will say that Phil Neville's been much better than I had anticipated. I thought it was a comically bad hire when the Timbers made it, and it does not look like it has been a comically bad hire. This has been a pretty good Timbers team, all things considered. But he does not strike me as the kind of coach who's just going to come in and grind out a result.
Yeah, these are the kind of games where I think the reasons it was a bad decision could potentially come to light, right? Like he is just incapable of being anything but himself, which can be beneficial sometimes. They've scored 64 goals this year, right? Can also be not as great.
Yeah. To go into what the Sounders probably need to do to shut down the Timbers, I think it might be as simple as Evander. He has been as not as unimpressive as he was last year. He's been every bit as impressive this year. He is scoring goals from all over the park. He is assisting. He obviously had the assist in the last meeting against the Sounders. I'm not as, this is the famous last words, I suppose, but Jonathan Rodriguez, the Sounders have done a good job with Jonathan Rodriguez and Felipe Mora in the 2 previous games for the most part. They've also found some joy with their fullbacks getting forward, although it was funny because I thought they did a great job against their fullbacks for the whole game the last time, and then inexplicably they give up this counterattacking chance to the Timbers that they score on through their fullback. But don't get me wrong, there's plenty of reasons, plenty of ways I can see the Sounders not winning this game, but this is the kind of game I do feel good about this one.
This is a game where if you don't win, I do think you have to start considering whether or not there's some kind of curse or voodoo, black magic, something at play that's metaphysical in some way. It's really just the Sounders are clearly a better team. I think they're a good matchup for the Timbers. I think it's a hugely important game for both teams, even more so than a normal Portland Seattle game because of the playoff positioning and everything, and the Cascadia Cup being on the line. So I don't think there's any risk of anybody not being up for it. I just, I feel good about it as well, and I feel awful for feeling good about it.
Right. I know. Isn't that a strange feeling?
Yeah, it's quite a conundrum.
Yeah. Well, all right. So the last bit I wanted to go over here is there are 3 potential playoff matchups that the Sounders can have. They can face either the Rapids, Minnesota United, or Houston Dynamo. I guess the way I'll phrase this is, are you at all worried about any of those 3? Like, that's the wrong way of putting it. Those, I'll just say, for me, those feel like 3 pretty good matchups for the Sounders.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I have any emotional interest in which of those 3 they play.
All 3 are teams that you have to feel like you can beat. I don't know that there's one that's any better than the others. Colorado, obviously, I think is the more interesting one because they were up towards the top of the table for so much of the year and have slid so quickly. I think that the version of Colorado that we've seen in the last couple months is probably closer to the real version of Colorado, but they've been very good at home, which is, you're going to have to play one of these teams on the road. So that's a factor. Houston has been awful at home, but they've been quite good on the road. They have the same road record as the Sounders, in fact. So maybe that's a factor, but I think really, this whole tangent is evidence that you're really splitting hairs at this point. Like I
mean, Minnesota's probably the hottest of the 3 teams. Yeah. They have 2 losses basically since Leagues Cup. One was against the Sounders, and then the other was against FC Cincinnati. Houston, I think, has maybe shown the highest upside of the 3, and the Rapids have probably been the most consistent team throughout the season.
I think Houston is probably the best team of all 3. That's a fair argument. Choose. Minnesota is a very familiar opponent for the Sounders. They've played like 6 times this year or something like that.
They have played 3 times. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe we're their LAFC.
Is that right? No, I guess they've played 3 times this year. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they could end up playing 6 times total.
Yeah. But yeah, so maybe because we've beaten them all 3 times, so maybe we're LAFC to them. That's kind of fun to think about. But yeah, I think they're all good teams and they're capable of upsetting the Sounders. I like that's the playoffs in MLS, but the three legs, I guess you can't really call them legs. That's kind of R-rated if you call it 3 legs, but three games definitely gives you the advantage. I think it's the better higher seed. So whoever it is. Are you
at this point, do you have much emotionally invested in the side of the bracket they're on? Like, are you worried about being on an opposite side of the bracket than LAFC, or is it, I know earlier you said that you were sort of get it over with kind of thing? Like,
yeah, I'm increasingly there. I mean, I think that from a objective standpoint, it's probably better for the Sounders to be on the opposite side of the bracket of LAFC. But I think that most likely means they lose to the Timbers. So there's that. And I just, you can't run scared your whole life, I guess. If they, and in a way, right, if they get knocked out of the playoffs by LAFC, well, of course they did, right?
Right.
Like they can't hurt me that much more, I don't think, than they already have. And if they beat LAFC, I kind of don't really care what happens in the rest of the playoffs. That's hyperbole.
I mean, I don't know. There's something to be said about that. Like, if there is something to be said by if they were to beat LAFC and then fall short of MLS Cup, there is sort of I think that's a different feeling than if they get knocked out by LAFC.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the 2015 season felt pretty good at the end because we finally beat the Galaxy in the playoffs. And it just felt like such a monkey off the back, right? And I think it could kind of be similar to that. This Sounders team is better than that Sounders team was, and so I'd obviously I think they have a real shot at making a run if they can get past LAFC. But yeah, it's so yeah, I'm kind of the mind that I don't really care. Whenever we play them is great. I'll be relieved if we can somehow avoid playing them there's a little part of me that will also be kind of bummed that we, didn't get a chance to do it.
Yeah,
but,
for what it's worth, the best case scenario for avoiding them is for LAFC to win their season finale by multiple goals, and they are playing
San Jose.
So that's
on the table. Yeah.
That's pretty. They're a home game against San Jose. That is definitely possible for them to win that game by multiple goals, and then Galaxy would basically just have to lose their season finale, and they are playing Houston away. So that's a plausible combination of results.
LAFC is definitely going to want to finish first, especially over the Galaxy. So it's not like they're going to be totally unmotivated,
No, right. Yeah.
Same goes for the Galaxy, obviously, but
yeah. And so I guess in that scenario, the Sounders would probably end up. Well, I guess ends up. I don't know. I'm not going to try to figure that out. But that wouldn't be the worst. That certainly wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for the Sounders, is if they could just avoid playing LAFC for as long, and sort of, if someone else knocks them out, so be it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I think I really want to beat LAFC in the playoffs, but I'm not going to be sad if we have to wait for another year to do that, because it means we don't have to play them and then we go on and win MLS Cup. That would be great.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good place to call it. We might come back and we'll have lots of fun post. We might do another post or another episode before the end of the season, the end of the regular season. Otherwise, we'll move straight into playoff preview mode next time you see us. But thanks again for listening. It's been a fun season this year. Like I said, lots of ups and downs, but I feel like the ups really did
eventually
count. Yeah. It felt. We'll see. Let's. I would really like it to just end on a high note, end the regular season on a high note. Put this behind us, move into the off season, or move into the playoffs, and feel good about all that. It would be nice to have. It would be fair.
Yeah, I think after the last season and the first chunk of this season, I think it would be nice to feel something pleasant again about this team.
Yes,
going into the off season.
Yes. All right. Well, with that said, I am Jeremiah O'Shannon signing off for Aaron Campo and Lickett. Thank you, of course, to our sponsor, Full Pool Wines. This is Nos Adietes, and remember, you will never get alone.
We love you. Let's win another one!